Здравствуйте, это канал Accent, и сегодня у нас в гостях Вадим Моzyrsky, адвокат и кандидат на должность комиссионер на ближайших выборах в Портленде. Здравствуйте.
Спасибо,
Очень приятно с вами встретиться. И для нас, конечно, для всего русскоговорящего комьюнити, конечно, очень важно и интересно, что человек, представитель нашего комьюнити, идет на такую важную городскую должность. Давайте начнем как бы издалека. Как и когда вы оказались в США?
Спасибо, что пригласили. Я буду немного по-русски говорить, но точно буду по-английски.
Да, переходить, да, конечно.
Я приехал в Портленд 8 лет назад, и мне очень здесь нравится. I fell in love with the people, with the culture, and also I came from an area where there were very few Russian people in Southern California, and even in Houston, people had moved away. And when I came here, I realized how diverse the area was. There's several Russian delis on the east side that I go to, and it's a place that I wanted to settle down and stay. So I was very much involved in city politics here, and I've served on several committees and commissions. I've been appointed by the mayor and city council to several organizations, and I'm also on the board for several committees, including for the immigrant and refugee IRCO here in Portland, as well as the Public Safety Action Coalition. So I've been working in Portland for quite some time in government matters. And I kept seeing how difficult it was for people to have their voices heard in City Hall. People would come with very practical solutions for their needs. And time again, those solutions were not implemented. And time again, people felt that they weren't heard. And so speaking with people that have been involved in politics here for a long time, they asked me to run for office. And I think with my framework of outreach, of building bridges amongst different communities, of hearing different voices, not just the voices that I want to listen to, but everybody around Portland, I felt that would be very important in City Hall right now. Portland is going through very difficult times. There's a lot of crime right now. We have a humanitarian crisis on our streets. The homelessness is spread throughout Portland. Lots of people dying on the streets. Lots of people dying of overdoses in the streets. And the question that people ask me over and over again is, what is the plan? What is the plan for Portland to return back to normalcy? And it's difficult to find what that plan is. And so I decided to run for office in order to work on those fundamental issues that people have of public safety, making sure that people are able to walk their neighborhoods, making sure that people feel safe where they live, and that their kids can play and feel safe to be outdoors. There's a lot of funding out there for that, but there's no plan in place as to how to ensure we have success. And also making sure that our government is responsive to the people, that they actually listen to the people and get the results that people expect them to have. And that's why I run for office, because right now there's very much a divisive atmosphere in Portland. My opponent is a person that's very divisive and is keeping Portlanders from working together on the difficult issues we have. And so I'm running to actually bring people together and work together on these solutions that we can achieve together.
Ну, это прекрасно звучит, это замечательный такой общий план. Давайте немножечко, вот о чем вы уже упоминали, немножечко, так сказать, детально подойдем. Потому что когда мы общаемся, беседуем вот в условно-славянском русскоязычном комьюнити, все-таки основная проблема, из которой истекает множество других проблем, и о чем вы тоже упоминали, это проблема бездомности, бездомные.
Да.
Люди всех политических взглядов, более консервативные, либеральные, все обращают внимание на этот вопрос. Кто-то предлагает радикальные меры, кто-то более мягкие. Каков ваш план? Каков ваш, может быть, стратегическое решение этого вопроса вы видите?
So part of the plan is making sure we have outreach to the homeless community. There's been several articles in the Oregonian recently about how people living on the streets, 75% of them have never been approached by a person that's trying to help them find housing. Of the 25% that have been approached, 2/3 of them said that no one ever followed up. So we need to make sure that we have enough outreach to people living in the streets. There's a lot of programs out there. In the metro area, there's about 240 nonprofits and charities that are working with homeless people. There's a program trying to help them get off the streets in one way or another. There's a lot of money coming in. So now we have a new tax that's going to bring in $2.5 billion over 10 years to help with homelessness, plus all the money that's already being spent. So we have a lot of programs, we have a lot of services, but we're not connecting people with those services. And so the first thing we need to do is make sure we are connecting people, and we make sure that the difficulty that is happening right now is that we have homelessness in every corner in Portland, and on the east side, on the west side, and it's impossible to connect every individual living throughout Portland like that to services. So we need to find places for them to go. We need to find shelters, we need to create villages, work with neighborhood associations, and if people are open to have villages in their neighborhoods, which a lot of people are, create places where homeless people can stay until we find services for them and help them transition to housing, increase the amount of shelter beds, and also have perhaps other alternative structures. I'm working with an individual named Keith Wilson, who is trying to create pop-up shelter spaces for people, being able to quickly create areas where people can congregate. So that might look like a field, it might look like an open space, might look like a garage, but where we can have individuals be sheltered so they're not living and dying on the streets. And once they're in those areas where we can provide those services day in and day out, every day go to them, provide housing services, make them have people sign up for housing. The wait is a long time, but they need to be in areas where they can sign up.
Каков вот все-таки конкретный план, чтобы этого не происходило, чтобы число не росло этих бездомных, да, с зависимостью, да? То есть вот всех объединить и сделать много всяких шелтеров, это хороший план, да, но все равно как-то не видно общего решения. Вот я как-то не могу этого понять.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Right now, talking to people that are working in this area, reading all the literature around it, it's hard to understand what the plan is. I agree completely.
Yeah.
The plan is that individuals that are suffering from drug addiction should not result in them being in jail. And I understand that plan. I think that there's merit for that plan. But how do you get those people that are drug addicted off the streets and get the help that they need? Right now, there's a lot of carrots, which are there's services. There's going to be about $150 million this year coming to provide additional services, drug addiction, mental health services. But there's no stick. There's no way for people that are not able to help themselves to do that. And that's where we need to focus in on. How do we encourage people that are in the midst of a drug addiction or perhaps are having schizophrenia or not able to make decisions for themselves? How do we help them get to an area where they can get that help? And the difficulty that I'm seeing in day-to-day and talking to people, talking to individuals that are working in the homeless community that are trying to help people, is that there's no incentive for people to actually accept those services and seek those services day in and day out. We need to have a plan to make sure that people not only have the option of those services, but actually avail themselves of those services. And so that entails working with certainly the advocates that are already in the streets, in the nonprofits and the charities, making sure that they're out there, making sure that we're working with the neighborhoods, the neighborhood associations and the businesses, so we get the input of what they're dealing with and what they're seeing. But also enforcement. We cannot let people live and die in the streets. It's no good for them. It's no good for the communities in which they reside. And so we need to work with other law enforcement mechanisms, whether it be the police or the sheriff's office, not to criminalize homelessness, not to put people in jail, but to provide another layer of incentives that people actually go and seek those services out. So for instance, Portland recently legalized drugs here. Measure 110. So now it's legal to have methamphetamines, it's legal to have heroin to a certain amount. Now what the repercussions of that is, if an officer finds somebody with methamphetamines or heroin, they give them a ticket, basically a $100 ticket. It's not a criminal ticket, you will never go to jail for not paying that ticket, but you also get a card with a phone number. And you call that card and they link you to services, whether it be mental health, drug addiction, housing. That's one of the ways to get people into services. But that's not being done here in Portland. Of the over 1,000 tickets issued like that in the first 5 months across Oregon, only 23 were issued here in Multnomah County. We're not connecting people to services. We're not using our law enforcement to get people into the programs that they need. to get themselves out of the situations that they're experiencing. And that's what we need to do. It needs to be, everybody has to be brought together to make sure that people that are not making good choices in their lives have to make the correct choices so they can get back into housing, get back into jobs, and be able to go on with their lives.
So let's say just I'm homeless, right? I get a $100 ticket, and what do? Right? But I don't have $100, right? And I live on the street, and so maybe I misplace this ticket right away or something.
Yeah.
So is this ticket going to be efficient, or how is it going to help if we, instead of 20 tickets, we're going to issue 200 tickets?
Well, hopefully out of those 200 tickets, at least 20 of them will call that number and get some sort of services. It's a step. But you're absolutely right. There's no repercussions for not paying that ticket. There's no repercussions for losing that ticket. People are supposed to call into that number and maybe appear in court, and then they get the services that they need.
То есть, что конкретно должно измениться? Потому что, в принципе, все это вот было. И из того, что вы говорите, я пока не слышу, что вот конкретно, вот какое-то такое вот особое решение, которое заставит вот эти механизмы, все, о которых вы говорите, правильные механизмы, заставит их работать.
Once again, the enforcement mechanism is important, and that's a conversation that we need to have amongst Portlanders, make sure that they understand what's needed and everybody's on board with that. But let me give you an example. So I was speaking with people that live in the Laurelhurst area of Portland. There's a large park, and for the past few years, they've had a homeless encampment that would be in that park. And then the city would come in after a few months of people living there. Sometimes they've been, most of them are law-abiding people, but some of them also were threatening individuals. Some people had guns. Some people blocked off the streets and asked people to pay money in order to get in their neighborhood. So there was some criminality there as well. And the city came in, and instead of dealing with that head on, they just asked people to move. Well, first of all, they offered them shelter space. Out of about 60 people that were in that area that were offered shelters, and there were low barrier shelters, so you can come with your loved ones, you can come with a pet, you can even use drugs and still remain in that shelter, very low barrier. Only about 8 people accepted that shelter space rather than living on the street. So the city offered then instead a motel space. And the city pays about $100 a night for individuals to stay in a motel. They get food, they get housing, they get obviously a warm shower and a roof over their heads. Only an additional 16 people out of those 60 people accepted the motel space.
То есть мы видим, что многие из тех людей, которые живут на улице, не хотят принимать этой помощи. Да, не хотят идти в гостиницу, не хотят идти в шелтер. Что делать?
Yeah, and I was out at a homeless shelter just a week ago on East Portland, Church of Nazarene. They have a homeless shelter. And once again, they're seeing the same thing. Some individuals come into their shelter, some individuals are camping outside. And I asked, why are these people camping outside? And the person that ran the homeless shelter, or the pastor out there, said that it was because of drugs. They were out there, they were using drugs, they could not have that same ability to do that in the shelter. Once again, we're getting back to the two main fundamental things here. One is drug addiction, which is very prevalent, and the other is mental health that our city and our county are not addressing. And we need to be able to work with the city and the county to help people with mental health impairments to find that stability. For some of them, that might be putting a hold on them, getting them doctor services, getting them medication, but putting them on hold until they have a little bit of stability, and then finding out what their needs are and getting them into housing, getting them into medication, getting them into counseling. And for the drug addiction, we have to cope with that and with the avenues that we have. If they're breaking other laws, make sure we address those laws that are being broken. Being homeless is not illegal. Sleeping in the streets is not illegal. That's a decision of the courts. People have the right to sleep in the streets if there's not a shelter bed available, which is why I'm saying we need to increase temporary shelters. Some people are saying, let's build permanent housing for everybody. That's about 10 years away for the amount of people we have in Portland right now. It's very, very expensive. Some of the housing that's being built right now for individuals living in the streets, it costs $500,000. It's very expensive to build housing in these areas. In the meantime, though, I mean, that's a good long-term plan, but in the short term, we need to have more shelters. If people are not going to shelters, we need to understand why they're not going to shelters. We need to put them away from every street corner where they're not getting services to centralized areas where they can get those services. And if they refuse, and if they're breaking other laws, threatening people, using guns, selling drugs, there's a lot of crime that is happening that is not being addressed. And unfortunately, people feel it's compassionate to allow people to live in the streets, but a lot of that crime happens within the homeless community. 10 murders occurred in the homeless community last year out of the 92 murders that happened in Portland. We need to make sure that we address these other crimes. We need to bring stability to these individuals where they can make those choices in their lives that are good choices about housing and mental health services and drug addiction services. And if that takes the involvement of the police and the sheriff's office, we need to work together.
Вот вы упомянули о том, что да, это не есть illegal спать на улице, но тем не менее мы часто видим палатки бездомных просто под надписью, что здесь не разрешено ставить палатки. Да, в парках мы это видим, где тоже строго запрещено ставить палатки. Тем не менее, бездомные там живут, и никто их не трогает. Вы считаете, это вот и должно так оставаться, или все-таки должны быть применены какие-то силы для того, чтобы хотя бы выдвинуть этих людей с тех территорий, на которых запрещено?
No, we can't let people camp wherever they want. We can't let people build structures in areas. That's not working. Everybody who's been to Portland or has walked around or driven around knows it's not working. That's what our current city council is allowing, and that's why I'm running for office, because that needs to change. We need to, once again, find places where people can have some refuge and have some stability. We need to increase shelter beds and make sure people go to those shelter beds. But we can't let them camp wherever they want, anywhere they want. The city has the authority, even under the Boise decision, the federal decision that says people should be able to camp in public places if there's no shelters. But the city can determine where that camping occurs. So it's not on every street corner, every neighborhood. Don't get me wrong, it's not humanitarian to allow people to live and die in our streets. It's not humanitarian to allow the neighborhoods and the people that are in those areas to bear having that happen in their neighborhoods. That's not humanitarian either. If we just had enforcement without services, that's not humanitarian. If we have services without any enforcement, that's not going to work. So part of my plan, again, is to increase places where people can go, and then make sure that people choose that option, so they're not camping on every corner, so we don't have these large encampments of 7, 8, 10 different tents or structures, sometimes more. And then once that happens and people are living in those areas and people are in that spiral of self-destruction that they have a hard time getting out, it's much harder to actually help them. And so we need to stop that before it gets out of hand, before they hurt themselves and before they hurt the neighborhoods in which they live.
Если сравнивать хаузинг для бездомных в Портленде с другими городами в США, то я слышал такое мнение, статистику, что в Портленде не хватает для бездомных жилья. Это действительно так или нет? То есть это может объяснить то, что происходит, что фактически у нас нету достаточно мест, где они могут проживать, и это часть проблемы.
That's
Или
true.
же это неправильная информация?
Это правильно. So it's true that there's not enough shelter beds to house everybody that's living on our streets. In Portland, the last point in time count where people go out and they talk to homeless and try to get a sense of how many people we have living in our streets, there were about a little over 2,000 people living in our streets, chronically homeless individuals that have been on the streets for a year or more. Right now, certainly anybody that's been around Portland knows it's more. We don't know quite how many. It could be 3,000, could be slightly less. Multnomah County, it used to be about 4,000, a little more. Now it's maybe 5,000, could even be more. And we need to find places for them to live. Right now, there's not enough shelter beds for everybody. But don't get me wrong, there's shelter beds available. One of the things that I've asked the people that are in charge of Joint Office of Homeless Services is put on your website how many shelter beds are available and where they're available. Because I've done outreach to homeless community members. I have friends and associates that do outreach. They go out and they see a person in the cold, out in the tent, and they try to help them. Here's go to Bybee Lakes. That's a homeless shelter, and we know how many beds they have. They publicize how many beds they have. but the city does not. And so we need to know what beds are available and where. And the reason I mentioned the point-in-time count is because when it was done in 2017, 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, 5 years ago, our shelter bed capacity was over 90% used. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was 93%, something like that, utilization. So there's only about 7% available beds. 2 years later, in 2019, that went down to a little over 80%. So we saw that more beds were being built, but more beds were not being utilized. And so that's where the difficulty is. Do we have beds available? Which it seems we do, based on talking with shelter spaces. If you go to the Greyhound station right now, people that work in that area in Old Town, they tell me that there are beds available there. How do we ensure that those beds are utilized? And that's the difficulty. That's the problem that we're having now. Is the good news is the money is available. So much money is coming in from the city, from taxes in the metro area, from the state, and also from the federal government. Part of the rescue funds is money going toward housing for homeless people. We just need to make sure it's utilized. And for that, we need to have transparency in how many beds are available, who is doing the outreach and whether they're successful, and how successful are all these plans. Once you go to the Joint Office of Homeless Services website, and you can't tell if a program is working or not working, what program is being funded and how successful they are. You go to more self-funded operations. I mentioned Bybee Lakes. So Alan Evans, who's a supporter of my campaign, he's the director of the organization called the Helping Hands, and they run the Bybee Lake Center. They had about 140 beds. Now they've recently expanded to about 300 beds. And they take referrals to go there, but you also know how many beds are available. They have an 80% success rate in helping people quit drug addiction and get jobs. They charge people to live in that area for free at first, but they charge people, and then they ask people to work in the areas around there, in warehouses and otherwise. Those people enjoy working. Those people enjoy having that stability, and then they pay to stay there. They save a little bit of money, and then they transition to housing. So here we have something that works. Bybee Lakes, 80% success rate in helping people transition from streets. And then we have the money that the city's being spent, which is way more than Bybee Lakes. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent, but no accountability. And so when I'm in office, I'm going to be calling for Joint Office of Homeless Services to have those statistics. How much money is being spent? Where are the beds? Where is it available if somebody needs to help somebody get off the streets? Where should they go? And what's working and what's not working. Let's fund what's working, and let's not fund what's not working.
Хорошо. А вот как насчет... Да, вот мы немножко поговорили о приборке еще до записи. О приборке на улицах, о вот той грязи, которая бывает чаще всего, опять же таки, от стоянок бездомных. Как насчет такой идеи? Просто платить самим же бездомным за то, что они будут прибирать улицы. Доплачивать им. У них будут какие-то, может быть, не очень большие деньги, но те, которые они действительно заработают. И они сами будут их убирать. Вот такие, я просто озвучиваю те предложения, которые, опять же таки, звучали в каких-то чатах русскоязычного комьюнити. Вот как вам такая идея?
And I've actually, we've tried that. So in Old Town, people that I know and have worked with in neighborhood associations, they went out and they offered to pay people for bags of trash. And sure enough, people came with bags of trash. I mean, it is something that's doable, and our city should do it. Same thing with syringes. You know, we have a free syringe program, but we don't have a syringe pickup program per se. One of the things that a lot of people complain about is having campsites with open syringes and open drug use. Pay people to actually turn in their syringes, and I guarantee we'll have less of that. We need to incentivize good behavior rather than incentivizing bad behavior. So I agree with all the money that we have, with the hundreds of millions of dollars, help people get into a situation where they're working to better their lives. If they can get paid to clean up around their areas, if they can get paid to do even small tasks, let's do that. It's been tried a little bit in some of the encampments that we have around town, including the C3PO villages. Some of those people are actually paid to work in those villages, whether to help people that are coming in, to work sort of as social workers within that village. But what we're not seeing is that transition from paying people to help out with that village to getting people into jobs where they can get out of the village. We're missing that piece.
Давайте немножечко еще поговорим вот о той составляющей бездомных, люди с ментальными проблемами.
Да.
Да. Тем более это связано с вашей работой как адвоката, вы же, собственно, представляете интересы людей с disability. Тут получается тоже такая проблема, которую сложно решить. С одной стороны, невозможно людей заставить пойти в больницы, то есть, опять же таки, forced, потому что это как бы незаконно. С другой стороны, мы видим, да, люди требуют, люди ходят по улицам, кричат, требуют просто явно медицинского какой-то помощи. Что предметно вот для них вы предлагаете?
Oregon has one of the highest rates of both drug addiction and mental health. They, in some ways, go hand in hand. People self-medicate and things like that. But one of the least amount of money spent in the country. I think it's the least amount of money per capita in the country on mental health services. We don't have very many places for people to go, and we're not providing the services that they need. We do have good insurance here with the Oregon Health Plan where we can get people the medications that they may need. But once again, we're failing that, and that's a county and state issue. What people don't realize a lot is that the city is not responsible for mental health services, it's the county, and also the state provides mental health funding. So we need to work better with the county and the state in order to get people the help that they need. That's coordination between city council and the county commissioners as well as the governor. We're not seeing that coordination right now very well. But also we need to make sure that if people are experiencing trauma that is where they're hurting themselves or where they're hurting others, that they are put into places where they can once again find stability, get medications that they need. So let me give you an example. I'll use Old Town again because there's so much going on there right now. There was a lady that was living on the streets of Old Town, oftentimes naked, oftentimes on a mattress on the sidewalk. People in that area that I know, some of them are business owners in that area, some of them are individuals that live and work in that area, called the city, called the county, asking for help. No one from the city came out, no one from the county came out. If they did, they didn't take her anywhere where she could find warmth and shelter and get help. In a moment of lucidity, one of the bar owners in that area was able to reach her and got information about her relatives. He called her relatives, and they put a 3-day hold on her, which relatives apparently can do. And then she was put on hold. She got medications. The relatives came and then took her home and are helping her right now. That's a success story, but it's not a success for the city. It's not a success for the county.
Это интересный пример. Да,
yeah, it's a success because people in that area were doing what our city and county are not doing. That person should have had outreach workers every day going there, making sure that she was okay. And in that moment of lucidity, it shouldn't have been some person that was working in that area helping her. It should have been an outreach worker. We have plenty of money. We have plenty of people that are willing to help. We're just not coordinating that well. So it's a success story, and it's what should be done.
Вот давайте развернем это так, как это должно быть, вот как вы считаете, да? Чтобы не человек, который просто вот работает на соседней улице, вот, вошел в контакт с родственниками и помог решить эту проблему. Такой же человек появляется на соседнем, там, в Чайна-тауне, на соседней улице. Что должно происходить? Вот люди начинают звонить, да? Ну или полицейский мимо, патруль проезжает, видит такую ситуацию, человек голый, кричит на улице. Что должно произойти, чтобы, как технически это должно срабатывать, чтобы это было эффективно, быстро и не очень дорого для города?
I'll tell you about one thing that is in place right now that will be expanded. It's called Portland Street Response. Portland Street Response was started by Street Roots, an organization that advocates for homeless individuals. They got funding for $500,000. The mayor provided $500,000 for outreach workers. So a van with people inside it, a social worker, a trauma-informed individual, and also a medic to go out there and help people in experiencing crises. It's based on a model in Eugene. In Eugene, it's run by a nonprofit. They have $2.2 million budget, and they provide round-the-clock, 24/7 services throughout Eugene. They answer 15,000 calls for people that call up, and they're like, we need an individual is in the streets acting erratically, somebody help, and they answer that. In Portland, we sort of thought that model would work. The city council put Portland Street Response into the Fire Bureau, under the Fire Bureau, which is controlled by my opponent, Joanne Hardesty, the person I'm running against. And they got additional funding of $5 million to implement this program, which is 2.5 times more what Eugene is doing. And with that $5 million, my opponent was able to buy 1 van and hire 3 people to help homeless people. Only in Lentz, not citywide, in the Lentz neighborhood, working 10 to 6 Monday through Friday. For about 2 years. They just finished their pilot project. Now they're getting it was defunded because the money wasn't being used, and now they're getting more money. But that's where we are not working well as a city. The plan is good. The implementation is terrible. So once again, we had $5 million, should have been services citywide, many vans traveling around, responding to calls that right now maybe the police are taking, or unfortunately the police would need to take. Instead, we didn't get our money's worth for that. So we need to implement more Portland Street Response so we have people that understand what's going on, can go out there. We also need to work with the state, whatever that might look like, in order to ensure that people that are suffering, people that might have a life and death situation where they're sleeping outside in the cold, might be harming other individuals. Some of these individuals have weapons, and if so, we need to make sure that they're not harming themselves. We need to make sure they're not harming other individuals, and get them that stability, whether it's a 72-hour hold for medications for people to evaluate if they're okay, and give them a little bit of stability so they don't end up hurting themselves or somebody else. And we're working on that, but it's too slow, which is why I'm running for office.
Вот скажем, вы выиграете офис, да? И начнете имплементировать эту программу, какой критерий успеха? Вот в какой ситуации, по каким показателям вы можете сказать, что я успешен?
Yeah, exactly. And we need that criteria. So within a year, 30% less homeless people on the streets in Portland. Shelter beds, alternative shelters, trying to find if they have relatives that will help them, especially people experiencing mental health crises, 30% less within a year. And then afterwards, incrementally going more and more and more down that road. I think it's very doable. Once again, we have the services. We have people that are willing to roll up their sleeves. We have organizations that are out there that could help. We have the funding for housing, but we're not utilizing that. So let me give you another example. As part of the Recovery Act, Portlanders, our government was given by the federal government something like 500 vouchers for housing. And this is not Section 8 housing, this is not special housing, this is market rate housing, where the government said, here's a lot of money, we'll pay for people to go into housing. 6 months later, our city, I think, gave away less than 20 of those vouchers. Washington County, I believe, utilized all the vouchers that they had. Clackamas County, a high percentage of the vouchers that they had. Portland, I think it was less than 10% of the vouchers. It might have been 5% of the vouchers.
Okay.
We're just not using the tools at our disposal. We could have had over 400 people in housing that are living in the streets. Instead, people talked about it, they thought about it, I don't know what they did with that time, but they didn't utilize it. Same thing with the outreach. We see this over and over and again, where because there's no plan, because if you don't say 30% fewer homeless in 1 year, how do you know if you're working toward that? How do you know if you're successful?
Yeah, and even do you have the data for it currently? Do you have in place? How do you know? Right? How do you know what's the current situation? Right?
I'm gonna scare your audience here a lot because they'll see how broken our government is, but it is broken. You may have read about this, but the county auditor did an audit of the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which has a budget of $150 million this year. It's a partnership between the city and the county to help people with experiencing homelessness. And the auditor wanted to know how many people they had put into housing. The auditor came out with a report saying, I can't figure out how many people they put into housing. She said 20% that they said were housed were not housed. These individuals went there just for some sort of services, could have been food, could have been clothing, some other services, not housing, but they put them down as people that they helped house. The other 80%, the record keeping was so bad as to where they were staying, where they were sent, no one checked in on them, that she said even with the other 80% that did come there for housing, I have no idea whether they actually received the housing, where they are. Scathing report, because the people we have in place to ascertain whether people are working and actually solving the problems are not doing their job. The goals are not there, the metrics are not there as to how to reach those goals, and the accountability is not there. And so we need to turn all this around. Once again, we have the money, we have the resources, we have people willing to help, but the plan is broken, and we need to start from scratch in some ways. It's important.
So your campaign is kind of, the motto of your campaign, so to speak, could be efficiency or implementation oriented.
Yeah.
So make things work.
Rationality. Yeah. No, what I'm running on is common sense solutions to our problems, pragmatic solutions. People in City Hall right now talk about compassion. They talk about these grand plans, and that's true. We need to be compassionate. We need to think of what's best for the people living in our streets and what's best in the people that are housed and are their neighbors. But we need to be practical about those solutions. There are success stories. Several cities around the country have had success in addressing their homelessness. San Diego has done a great job in addressing their homelessness on the streets. Houston has, Miami has, Salt Lake City has. There's various organizations, even Denver has, and we need to follow those models of what's worked. So San Diego has a very expensive housing market. Miami has a very expensive housing market. Houston's housing market has increased dramatically over the last few years, the cost of housing, of apartments, and yet they've been successful in addressing their homelessness. Our housing market is expensive, but we're unsuccessful, but we're not patterning our behavior on what's working. We're just spending more and more money on what's not working.
Хорошо, а как вот вы, критерии успеха, мы о них поговорили, а как достичь? Ведь это же работа в коллективе, да? Вот вы один, там 5 ваших сопредседателей, да? Как вы добьетесь того, чтобы вот они поддержали вас план, чтобы это не ушло все опять вот в песок? У вас есть какие-то вот для этого наработки? Или чем в этом вы лучше действительно вашего конкурента, против которого вы выставляетесь? Почему у нее не получилось, у вас получится?
So my opponent is very divisive. She's made a career out of pitting individuals against other individuals, of putting people in East Portland against West Portland, people in businesses against employees, people who are of different backgrounds against one another. Very divisive. My campaign is about being inclusive. I'm reaching out to all communities, certainly the Slavic community and the immigrant community in general, but also in East Portland, in West Portland, business interests, because we need the tax money, we need more building out of shelters and other things that they can help with. Also people that are employed and unemployed, and people in the homeless community, bring people together for solutions. I've been doing this for several years now. I've worked with Ted Wheeler, our mayor, in various capacities. I've worked with Dan Ryan, who's right now on the city side in charge of homelessness. I've worked with Mingus Maps, who has recently been elected to city council and is working on some of the crime issues that we have. I've already built partnerships, so when I'm in office, I'm able to work with individuals. Right there, you'll have 4 votes of us working together to solve the problems. Instead of being divisive in city council and pitting people against one another and causing, right now the problem that we have is that people aren't working together on our solutions, they're working separately, which is the problem in our government, is that there's too much siloing effect and people working on their own causes and not together. I will be able to work together with these individuals. Also with the county, I'm working with Sharon Myron, who's running for county chair. And the county is going to be very instrumental because, once again, they provide the mental health services that are going to be necessary. And so I've been building these relationships where, when I'm in office, we're going to be able to work together to address these issues. And everybody knows what these issues are. It's not a secret. What we're talking about here is not surprising for anybody that's been involved in Portland government for a while. They're just not working on the solutions. Everyone is working separately, and I'll be able to bring those people together, and I'll be able to reach out to the community, get input from people, and bring people on board so they can talk to City Hall and talk about their needs. So City Hall is not just listening to certain individuals, certain demographics, but listening to everybody. We have more in common than we have things that separate us. It's just the ability to work together, and I'll be able to do that.
Ну и следующий вопрос, это вопрос о работе полиции. Тоже людей очень беспокоит эта тема. Как вы уже сами заметили, это не секрет, число преступлений растет, и преступлений с применением оружия, и просто кражи на улицах. Каков ваш план в этом? Требует ли портландская полиция реформы или не требует? Что надо сделать, чтобы ситуация вернулась хотя бы к тем показателям, которые были вот до начала этого роста преступности?
Yes, we need to continue reforming the police, but we need to rebuild the police. I've worked on what's called the Citizen Review Committee, so it's an organization that hears complaints against the police bureau. I'm very familiar with what those complaints are and what the police need in order to improve the culture within the police. I've also been appointed to what's called the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, which once again bridges that community engagement piece between the police and the different communities in Portland. I've worked with the U.S. Justice Department on the oversight that they have in the police, training, making sure that the police are responsive to the needs of the community. These are areas where I've been working on for several years, and so we need to continue on those reforms. We need to make sure that our police are the best trained. We need to make sure if there's a police officer that is acting inappropriately, that they're disciplined. And if they need to be fired, we need to make sure that they're removed. But in my experience, most police are out there trying to do the best they can, helping individuals that are being victimized by somebody. If you call 911, you need a response that's very quick, and we're not seeing that right now. In order to be able to address the crime issues, in order to answer the 911 calls quickly and effectively, we need to make sure we have an adequate police force. Right now, during the last budget, I advocated for 300 extra police officers to be hired. That will only bring us back to where we were a couple of years ago, to where the basic needs of Portland could be met. But if you look statistically around the country, Portland has about 30% police per capita than Seattle. We have about 70% less police than Denver. And nationally, on average, we have about half the number of police per capita than the average for the whole country. And we need to have those conversations. How much policing do we need in order to have the accountability, have the responses that we need? Right now, last year, we had the highest murder rate in the history of Portland. We had the most shootings in the history of Portland. We had the most shootings resulting in injuries, just people being shot, not killed, in the history of Portland. We had one of the highest, I think in 30 years, the highest fatalities on our roads because we no longer have police patrolling for drunk drivers or people that are speeding. We see the ramifications of that. We have more break-ins, one of the highest car thefts in the history of Portland last year. It goes on and on and on. And we need to have an adequate number of policing so they can be proactive. The success of policing is not just arresting somebody after they've committed a crime or investigating a crime. The success is having the police out there to intervene before a crime occurs. So, for instance, the Gun Reduction Violence Task Force that the City Council disbanded about 2 years ago, their job was not to just arrest people in gangs. Their job was, if there was a shooting, to go out and make sure that that shooting didn't escalate into further reprisals. And they were pretty good at that. They did their job. Now we're seeing shootings and we're seeing retaliation based on those shootings. We need to make sure that there's proactive policing to prevent people from killing one another. Talking to individuals in many neighborhoods, they want police to patrol their neighborhoods. They want police who know what their neighborhoods are like, the needs of their neighborhoods. And honestly, a lot of people want to see police walking around their neighborhoods so they know the neighbors, they know the needs of those areas rather than just coming there after a crime has been committed. And we need to listen to those people. These are individuals that know what their needs are, that know what their neighborhoods need, and the city needs to listen rather than tell people what their needs should be. And so, yes, we need more policing. We need different models of policing as well. So Portland Street Response, where if someone has a mental health crisis, instead of, if you call 911, instead of a police officer arriving, you have a social worker that arrives instead and tries to de-escalate the situation. I proposed to the city, to the mayor in the city, what's called a Public Safety Support Specialists, PS3, which are employees of the police bureau, but they're not armed. They're trained in some ways to respond to certain issues. They may take a police report. So if someone breaks into a business and they steal something, that person arrives, but they're not in uniform. They don't have a gun. They have a van that's not police van. They go out and they help the community members. This last budget, the city council decided to hire 100 of those individuals to address the needs of the community.
Другой вопрос, который тоже интересует русскоязычных, какие будут у вас области вашей ответственности? Будет ли это транспорт, будут ли какие-то еще другие области ответственности, будете ли вы все еще продолжать работу по структуре government structure, да, то есть вы тоже в этом комитете, я так понимаю, принимали активное участие. То есть какие ваши мысли по этому поводу?
So one of the few powers that our mayor has is assigning bureaus to different city council members. The mayor can propose the budget, the mayor can assign bureaus, and then otherwise it's very similar authorities. And for me, I want to be in charge of the Bureau of Civic Life. It's called the Office of Community and Civic Life because that's the outreach that the city has to neighborhood associations and getting input. It's also one of the bureaus that's tasked with addressing disability issues around the city, and we need to do better for the city to address disability issues, whether it's disability in the homeless community or disability issues that other people are experiencing that are not currently being addressed. Few people realize that Portland used to have a disability commission, but it doesn't anymore. And I think that's one of the failings of our city government. So I think with civic life, hearing people's voices is very important, and that's the organization that most directly addresses neighborhood associations and reaching out. The other organization that I want to be in charge of is the Parks Bureau. What are the reasons that people come to Portland? They come to Portland because of the size of the city and the livability, the walkability of the city. They come to Portland because of all the parks we have and the beauty in this area. They come to Portland because of the restaurants and the entertainment that we have. And they come to Portland because we're surrounded by such beautiful nature. And also we have great people here as well. And so with parks, the reason I want to work with Civic Life and Parks is we need to revitalize all those things that people come here to Portland for. Right now, if you go to downtown at night, you won't see many people. If you go to Old Town at night, you'll see people, but they're not generally during the daytime enjoying the businesses there and to the same extent they were before. Same thing in Eastern Portland as well. There's a lot of businesses, small businesses, but because of the difficulties Portland has experienced, people aren't coming to Portland as much anymore. People from the suburbs are not coming back to Portland. And also, we need to get the tax money back here from conventions, from people moving here, from visitors and businesses starting up. And those two organizations are going to be central to that, to bring back all those things that people love about Portland, make it safe for people to be in Portland, and have more people spending money and helping the businesses out. And the businesses need a lot of help downtown. Civic Life is also tasked with picking up or cleaning up the graffiti. And the money is just sitting there right now, about $400,000 that is unspent. And so we need to make sure that they're doing their jobs as well. And then, Joanne Hardesty, my opponent, has PBOT. It's a huge agency, lots of funding, transforming Portland. That agency honestly has had some difficulties recently when you're talking about, let's say we talked a lot about homelessness. People don't realize that the RV parking, where RVs are parked in areas where they're not supposed to be parked, that's a PBOT issue. Let's find places where we can put those RVs, parking lots or otherwise, where they're not in neighborhoods. Sidewalks, making sure that our sidewalks are accessible to disability communities. That's a PBOT issue as well. PBOT is not funding organizations that are making sure the sidewalks are clear and that the trash is being picked up. And then people come here because Portland is such a green area that you can bike around and walk around, that there's public transportation so you don't have to drive everywhere, that we don't have a lot of pollution. And we need to continue with that. And PBOT is very instrumental in that. Let's build out public transportation, Let's find ways to ensure that biking is safe in the city so that people don't have to be worried about being hit by cars, which happened a lot last year.
No.
A lot of pedestrians and bikers got hit, and that's because we're not making streets safe as much as we used to. Vision Zero, which is supposed to make our streets safer, is not working, and again, that's a government responsibility.
Multnomah County приняло такое решение о том, что Slavic people являются people of color. Ваше отношение к этому решению? Что вы об этом думаете? Это заслуживает, то есть это правильное решение или это какая-то ошибка?
Это правильно. And here's why. Yeah, and here's why I say it. The Coalition of Communities of Color put out a report probably about 15 years ago, but about 10, 15 years ago, about participation of Eastern Europeans and Slavic Slavs as to how they participate in government and how they're represented in our city. So as you can tell, I understand Russian okay. I don't speak it very well. That's the problem that we have a lot in our immigrant communities. People assimilate very much and they're not heard. Their voices, they don't come together and they don't make their voices heard. And so I think because Eastern European Slavic community is so broad and so large here in Portland, there are parts of that community that you would automatically think are parts of the community coalition of communities of color. Some other ones you may not think that, but working together we can make our voices heard. Together we can make our voices heard then independently, and I think that is important, that we form these partnerships of working together. So whether or not we fit into like a certain demographic is I don't think as important as the fact that we're building those bridges to other organizations, to other communities, and having our voices heard. I hope me running for city council will help people to vote and be more involved in government. Certainly that's the steps I took. I just went to City Hall and said, I want to help people with disabilities at that point in time. And somebody said, oh, we have a commission on disability. Why don't you apply to be in that commission? And that's what I did, and I served on that commission, and then I was appointed to other organizations. But you know, the first step is understanding what's out there and being able to work within that system. And sometimes it takes initiative on individuals, sometimes it takes initiative as a group. And so I believe that the help of other organizations, whether it's from the BIPOC communities or the coalition, will help us all work together. I know with my work on IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, they're very much advocates of being part of the Coalition of Communities of Color because they're seeing the benefits of that.
Лично себя вы как больше ощущаете? Как white или как people of color?
Slavic. Yeah. People ask me all the time on forums, you know, what is your ethnicity? And I write in other Slavic. You know?
Я думаю, это важно слышать нашим зрителям.
Specifically about the Slavic community, do you have, if you have any specific ideas, what do you think would be beneficial to bring into our Slavic community here?
Just especially
in Portland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Спасибо. We need to make our voices heard. Okay. What's the saying? Closed mouth doesn't get fed. There's a lot of support for organizations around Portland that the city provides. Not many of those organizations are Slavic. You know, we have a lot of individuals here, whether it's young people that are looking for good schooling, people that are looking for good jobs, the elderly that might need help, whether community centers or otherwise. These are all services that the city provides. And until the Slavic community, Eastern European community in general, comes together and advocates for those services, those fundings and those services will go to other organizations. So for me, one of the reasons I want to be the commissioner in charge of civic life is to make that outreach to all communities, whether it's African communities, whether it's Latino communities, Asian communities, but also Eastern European and Slavic community. The third most spoken language in Oregon, of course, is Russian, right? There's a lot of people out there, but you wouldn't know about it. And they need to make their voices heard. I think we need to organize better. Certainly when I'm in City Hall, one of the outreach efforts is going to be to the Slavic community. Whether that's the, every year I go to Star Theater, they have Chervona playing for Old New Year, and you see all those people come into Central Portland, dance, drink, eat, enjoy themselves. But otherwise, you don't see people gather. Or the Slavic festival every year that's on the east side of Portland, that's very important. Children, dancing, speeches, all that, some shashliki and all that kind of stuff. Very important. But we need to take that into a day-to-day situation where that culture is reinforced. I'm very sad that, I've lost a lot of my culture along the way. My parents always felt that it was important for me to assimilate, that it was important for me to be more American, that it was important for me to make, good grades, like so many immigrants, get good grades, go to school, get good jobs, and just keep your head low. I don't want to keep my head low anymore. I'm running for city council because I want to elevate those voices. And I think everybody needs to do that as well. People need to go out and vote. People need to go to city council chambers, and if they see something that they need to advocate for, they need to sign up to testify and say, no, this is not right, or no, we need more resources, or no, here's what we need. And there's people that are out there working in those areas, but we need more. And so if I can encourage people to do that, to join hands and work together, I definitely encourage that.
Вадим, спасибо огромное за ваше время, что вы нашли в своем занятом расписании время с нами встретиться и, в общем-то, нашим слушателям рассказать о ваших путях, о вашем видении решения проблем, которые стоят перед городом. К сожалению, понятно, что сегодня у нас время ограничено. Мы, конечно же, будем благодарны, если вы найдете еще другую возможность нам осветить другие вопросы также. Спасибо вам. И мы надеемся, что та информация, которую вы предоставили, это поможет нашим слушателям, зрителям тоже сделать какой-то информированный выбор в будущем. Спасибо.
Конечно, спасибо.
Спасибо большое.
Yeah, if everybody can go to my website, www.votevadim.com, sign up to volunteer, sign up to get emails from me, updates on my campaign, I'd appreciate it. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you for your questions, and anytime you want me back, I'll be back.
Thank you.